He never let himself be carried away by the music, until the maid appeared with her daughter and turned the night into something unexpected. Watch this story until the end. You will be surprised by this story. If you like stories, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day, continuing. The early morning mist clung to the windows of the Kensington Royal Hotel like whispered secrets, and Emma Hartwell moved through its gilded corridors as invisibly as that very mist. Her cleaning cart squeaked softly against the marble floors, a sound that had become the soundtrack to her existence over the past 3 years. She was 24. Though life had aged her in ways that didn't show in mirrors, her brown hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her uniform was pristine despite being second-hand. But there was something about Emma that refused to be diminished by circumstance. Perhaps it was the way she held her shoulders, straight despite the weight of exhaustion, or maybe it was the small butterfly brooch pinned carefully to her collar, an antique piece that seemed far too delicate for someone who spent her days scrubbing toilets and changing bed linens. The brooch had been her grandmother's, passed down with stories of transformation and hope that Emma clung to like a life raft in rough seas. "Emma, love, you'll be working the charity gala tonight," Mrs. Patterson, the head of housekeeping, announced as Emma restocked her cart. "Extra shifts for those willing. The Worthington Foundation is hosting their annual benefit. Very posh crowd." Emma nodded without looking up. Extra money meant she could buy Sophie, her 6-year-old daughter, new school shoes. The ones she had were holding together with determination and tape. The Worthington Foundation. Even Emma, who moved through London's elite circles as unseen as furniture, knew that name. Alexander Worthington was the heir to one of England's oldest fortunes, the kind of man whose photograph appeared in society magazines, and whose family name opened doors that remained locked to people like her. As evening fell, the hotel transformed. Crystal chandeliers blazed like captured stars, and the grand ballroom filled with the rustle of expensive gowns and the clink of champagne glasses. Emma worked the edges of the event, ensuring everything remained perfect for guests who never bothered to learn her name. She was emptying a wastebasket near the ballroom's side entrance when exhaustion hit her like a wave. The double shifts were taking their toll, and for just a moment she needed to stop. Slipping behind one of the heavy velvet curtains that framed the ballroom's tall windows, Emma leaned against the cool glass and closed her eyes. Just 5 minutes. That's all she needed. The sound of sharp heels on marble made her freeze. Through the curtain's fabric, she could hear voices approaching. "Honestly, Penelope, the guest list this year is absolutely dreadful," came a voice dripping with disdain. "Half these people wouldn't know charity if it knocked them over with a Bentley." "Well, what do you expect when they let just anyone buy tickets?" Another woman replied with a laugh that sounded like ice cracking, "though I suppose it's for a good cause." Emma held her breath, hoping they would move on, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. A gust of wind from an open door caused the curtain to billow, and suddenly Emma found herself exposed, standing there in her hotel uniform among the diamonds and designer gowns. The ballroom, which had been filled with the gentle murmur of polite conversation, fell into a silence so complete that Emma could hear her own heart beating. The woman who had been speaking, a blonde in her 40s with surgically enhanced features and a gown that probably cost more than Emma made in a year, stared at her with undisguised shock that quickly morphed into malicious delight. "Well, well," the woman announced loudly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "It seems we have a little mouse among the lions tonight." Emma's face burned with humiliation. She tried to speak, to explain that she worked here, that she had simply been taking a moment's rest, but the words stuck in her throat as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. The butterfly brooch at her collar felt like it was made of lead. I work here," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just—" "Oh, how delicious," the blonde continued, playing to her audience now. "A servant girl playing dress-up at our little soiree. Though I must say, darling, your costume needs work." The crowd rippled with nervous laughter, and Emma felt something inside her crack. This was worse than being invisible. This was being seen and found wanting, being held up as entertainment for people who lived in a world she could only clean. As she took a step backward, her hand instinctively went to her grandmother's brooch, seeking comfort in its familiar weight. But in her haste and humiliation, her fingers fumbled, and the precious pin came loose. The butterfly brooch fell to the marble floor, with a sound that seemed to echo through the vast ballroom like a gunshot. Emma's dignity seemed to fall with it. She knelt quickly, desperately searching for the brooch among the forest of expensive shoes and gown hems, but it had scattered into pieces. The delicate wings had broken off, and the body of the butterfly lay cracked on the cold marble, just like her heart. That's when everything changed. A hand appeared in her line of vision, gently picking up the broken pieces of her brooch. Emma looked up to see a man kneeling beside her, his tuxedo probably worth more than her entire wardrobe, carefully gathering every tiny fragment. Alexander Worthington was 32, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths Emma couldn't fathom. But as he held her broken brooch, something extraordinary happened. His face went pale, and his hands began to tremble slightly. "This brooch," he said quietly. His voice meant only for her ears. "Where did you get this?" "It was my grandmother's," Emma replied, her voice shaky with emotion and confusion. "It's all I have left of her." Alexander's breath caught. He stared at the broken butterfly as if it held the secrets of the universe, and perhaps in that moment it did. "What's your name?" he asked, still kneeling beside her on the ballroom floor while the crowd watched in fascination. "Emma. Emma Hartwell." "And do you have a daughter, Emma Hartwell?" Emma's world tilted on its axis. How could this stranger, this heir to a fortune, possibly know about Sophie? "Yes," she whispered. "Sophie. She's 6. Alexander closed his eyes as if in pain. When he opened them again, they were filled with something that looked like recognition and regret and hope all tangled together. "Sophie," he repeated, and the name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Short for Sophia." Emma nodded, unable to speak. Without warning, Alexander stood and extended his hand to her. The ballroom held its collective breath as Emma, confused and overwhelmed, allowed him to help her to her feet. "Would you dance with me, Emma?" he asked, and his voice carried across the silent ballroom. The blonde socialite who had started this whole humiliating spectacle sputtered in outrage. "Alexander, surely you're not serious. She's the help." But Alexander wasn't listening to her. He was looking at Emma with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the room. Without waiting for her answer, he led her onto the dance floor. The orchestra, well trained in reading the room, began to play a waltz. Emma hesitated, her hands shaking as Alexander placed one gently on her waist and took her other hand in his. "I don't understand," she whispered as they began to move. "Neither do I," he admitted. "Not completely, but I think I've been looking for you for a very long time." And then something magical happened. Emma's body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The years of ballet lessons her mother had sacrificed for, the dreams of dancing professionally that had died when life demanded more practical pursuits. Her feet found the rhythm, her body flowed with the music, and suddenly she wasn't Emma the cleaning lady anymore. She was Emma the dancer. Emma the woman who had once believed in fairy tales. They moved across the dance floor with a grace that seemed to come from somewhere beyond mere technique. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the servant girl and the heir waltzed like they had been partners their entire lives. Emma's work dress spun around her legs, transforming in the ballroom lights from a symbol of her servitude into something almost ethereal. "You trained," Alexander said as they spun, and it wasn't a question. "A long time ago," Emma replied. Before life got complicated. Before Sophie." Emma stumbled slightly, but Alexander caught her smoothly, never missing a beat. "How do you know about my daughter?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice now. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Because I think she might be mine too." The music swelled around them, but Emma barely heard it. She was falling into the depths of Alexander's eyes, into a memory that felt like a dream half remembered. 6 years ago, a different life, a man she had loved with all her heart and soul, who had vanished from her life as suddenly as he had entered it. "James," she whispered, using the name he had gone by then. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "though my family never knew me by that name." The waltz ended, but they stood frozen in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by a crowd that might as well have been ghosts. Emma felt like she was drowning in memories and confusion, and a hope so fragile she was afraid to acknowledge it. "I looked for you," Alexander said urgently. "When you disappeared, I turned London upside down looking for you. You were pregnant, and then you were just..." Gone. I didn't disappear, Emma said, tears streaming down her face now. You did. One day you were there and the next. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander announced suddenly, his voice carrying across the ballroom. I'd like you to meet Emma Hartwell, and if any of you have a problem with her being here, you can take it up with me. But Emma couldn't handle any more. The weight of the evening, the humiliation, the confusion, the impossible possibility that the father of her child was standing in front of her. After 6 years of absence, it was all too much. She pulled away from Alexander's embrace and ran, pushing through the crowd of bewildered socialites and out of the ballroom. She didn't stop running until she reached the hotel's service entrance, where the London night air hit her like a slap. Her chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, tried to make sense of what had just happened. Behind her, she could hear footsteps, and she turned to see Alexander emerging from the hotel, still carrying the broken pieces of her butterfly brooch. "Emma, please," he called. "Don't run away again. Not again." But Emma was already backing away, shaking her head. "I can't do this. I won't let you hurt Sophie the way you hurt me." "I never hurt you," Alexander said desperately. "I never wanted to leave you. Something happened, something I'm only just beginning to understand." But Emma was already gone, disappearing into the London night, like the mist that had started her day. She left behind a ballroom full of shocked socialites, a man clutching the broken pieces of a butterfly brooch, and questions that had no easy answers. What Emma didn't know, as she made her way home to her tiny flat where 6-year-old Sophie slept peacefully, was that her life had just changed forever. The dance was over, but the music was just beginning to play, and in the shadows of the hotel, watching from a window high above, a woman with silver hair and cold eyes had seen everything. Victoria Worthington had not become one of London's most powerful matriarchs by allowing threats to her family's reputation to go unchallenged. The cleaning girl would have to be dealt with. Again. Emma's hands were still shaking as she turned the key to her small flat in Bethnal Green. The contrast between the glittering ballroom she had just fled and this cramped 2-bedroom apartment couldn't have been starker, but tonight, the familiar surroundings felt like a sanctuary. She leaned against the closed door, finally allowing herself to breathe. "Mummy?" came a sleepy voice from the hallway. Sophie appeared in her pajamas, her dark hair tousled from sleep, rubbing her eyes with small fists. At 6 years old, she was the perfect blend of Emma's delicate features and something else. Something Emma had tried not to think about for years. But after tonight, after seeing Alexander's face, the resemblance was undeniable. "What are you doing up, sweetheart?" Emma asked, quickly wiping the tears from her cheeks and forcing a smile. "I heard the door. Did you have a good day at work?" Sophie yawned, padding over to wrap her arms around Emma's waist. Emma knelt down to Sophie's level, studying her daughter's face, those eyes so dark and intelligent, the stubborn set of her jaw when she was determined about something, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. How had Emma never seen it before? Or perhaps she had, and had simply refused to acknowledge it. "It was interesting, love," Emma said carefully. Emma said, "Come on, let's get you back to bed." As she tucked Sophie under her worn but clean covers, her daughter's small hand caught hers. "Mummy, you look sad. Are you sad?" The innocence in Sophie's question nearly broke Emma's heart all over again. How could she explain that her world had been turned upside down in the space of a single dance, that the father Sophie had never known, the man Emma had convinced herself was better off forgotten, had walked back into their lives in the most impossible way? "Sometimes grown-ups get confused about things," Emma said softly, smoothing Sophie's hair. "But you don't need to worry about that. You just need to focus on being 6 and wonderful." Sophie giggled. "I am pretty wonderful, aren't I?" "The most wonderful girl in all of London," Emma confirmed, kissing her forehead. "Now sleep. You have school tomorrow." But sleep wouldn't come for Emma. She sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her reflection in the dark window, replaying every moment of the evening. Alexander's face when he saw the brooch. The way he had said Sophie's name like it meant everything to him. The recognition in his eyes when he looked at her. James. That's what he had called himself 6 years ago when they met at a small cafe in Notting Hill. She had been taking a break between her dance classes and her job at a bookshop, and he had told her he was a graduate student. They had talked for hours about books and dreams and the future. He was charming and intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. For 3 months, they had been inseparable. Emma had fallen completely, hopelessly in love for the first time in her life. James had been different from anyone she had ever known, thoughtful and passionate, with a way of making her feel like she was the most important person in the world. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. No explanation, no goodbye. Just empty silence where his voice used to be. Emma had called his number countless times, but it had been disconnected. She had gone to his flat, but the landlord said no one by that name had ever lived there. 3 weeks later, Emma discovered she was pregnant. Now, sitting in her kitchen at 2 in the morning, Emma tried to make sense of it all. If James was really Alexander Worthington, heir to one of England's wealthiest families, why had he been pretending to be a poor graduate student, and why had he vanished so completely? The next morning brought answers Emma wasn't prepared for. Mrs. Patterson was waiting for her when she arrived at the hotel, her usually kind face set in uncomfortable lines. "Emma, love, I need to speak with you," she said, not meeting Emma's eyes. Emma's heart sank. She had hoped that maybe somehow last night's disaster would just fade away, become another piece of hotel gossip that would die down in a few days. "I'm being let go, aren't I?" Emma said quietly. Mrs. Patterson's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry, love. It's not my decision. Orders came from the very top this morning. They're saying it's about professional conduct and maintaining appropriate boundaries with guests." Emma laughed bitterly. "Appropriate boundaries, right. Your final pay will be sent to your address," Mrs. Patterson continued, clearly hating every word she had to say. "And Emma, for what it's worth, I think this is rubbish. I think you're the best worker I've ever had. And anyone with half a brain could see you weren't doing anything wrong last night." But Emma was already walking away, her mind racing. Jobs like this one weren't easy to find, especially with her limited qualifications. She had been at the hotel for 3 years, building a reputation as reliable and hard-working. Now she would have to start over, and she wasn't sure how long their small savings would last. Meanwhile, across London, in the Worthington family's Mayfair mansion, Alexander was having a very different kind of morning. "You had her fired," he said without preamble, as he stormed into his mother's sitting room. Victoria Worthington didn't look up from her morning tea and newspapers. At 62, she was still a striking woman, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and the kind of posture that suggested she had never doubted her place in the world for a single moment. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about, darling," she said coolly. "Emma Hartwell, the woman from last night. She was dismissed from the hotel this morning, and we both know you made a phone call." Victoria finally looked up, her pale blue eyes as cold as winter morning. "Alexander, I've spent 32 years protecting this family's reputation. I'm not about to stop now because you've developed a fascination with the help. She's not just the help, Mother, and you know it." Victoria set down her teacup with deliberate precision. "Do I? Because what I saw last night was my son making a spectacle of himself with a servant girl while half of London's social elite watched. The phones have been ringing all morning." Alexander moved to pour himself coffee from the silver service on the sideboard, his movements sharp with barely contained anger. "What did you do to her 6 years ago?" "I beg your pardon. Emma, when she knew me as James Morrison, what did you do to make her disappear?" Victoria's face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Mother. I remember now. The graduate program at Cambridge that you insisted I attend under a false name to understand how ordinary people live. The flat you rented for me in that shabby building. The allowance that suddenly stopped, forcing me to come home early. It was all orchestrated, wasn't it?" Victoria stood, moving to the window that overlooked the perfectly manicured square. "You were 26 years old and infatuated with a shopgirl. You were going to throw away everything this family has built for generations. I loved her. Love," Victoria said the word like it tasted bitter, "is a luxury people like us cannot afford. Your marriage will unite 2 of England's most prominent families. Your children will inherit not just money, but power, influence, the ability to shape this country's future. That little cleaning woman could never give you that." "That little cleaning woman gave me a daughter," Alexander said quietly. Victoria turned from the window, her face pale but her voice steady. "According to who? Some servant with a story and a conveniently aged child. Alexander, surely you're more intelligent than that." But Alexander was already walking toward the door. "Stay away from her, Mother. I'm warning you." Victoria's voice followed him out of the room. "And I'm warning you, my dear boy, some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. Consider your choices very carefully." Emma spent the rest of that day walking through London, trying to clear her head and figure out her next move. She had dropped Sophie off at school as if everything was normal, but her mind was spinning with questions and fears. When she returned to collect Sophie that afternoon, Mrs. Chen, Sophie's teacher, asked to speak with her privately. "Is everything all right at home, Emma?" the kind woman asked. Sophie seemed unsettled today. She kept asking questions about fathers and families. Emma's heart clenched. Did she say anything specific? She asked if it was possible for daddies to come back if they've been gone for a long time. I told her that families come in all shapes and sizes, and what matters most is love. But I wanted to check with you. That evening, as Emma was preparing a simple dinner of pasta and vegetables, there was a knock at the door. Emma's blood ran cold when she looked through the peephole and saw a man in an expensive suit holding an official-looking envelope. "Emma Hartwell?" he asked when she opened the door. "Yes?" "You're being served with papers from the family court. You have 30 days to respond." Emma's hands shook as she took the envelope. After the man left, she sat at her kitchen table and read the papers with growing horror. Someone had filed a complaint with Child Services, claiming that she was an unfit mother. There were allegations of neglect, of providing inadequate living conditions, of emotional instability. All lies. Every single word was a lie. But Emma knew that sometimes lies, when told by the right people with enough money and influence, could become truth in the eyes of the law. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Emma found herself standing in her daughter's doorway, watching her sleep. Sophie lay on her side, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days, her face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. How far would the Worthington family go to protect their reputation? How much power did they really have? As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Hyde Park, Speaker's Corner. Come alone." Alexander. Somehow he had gotten her number, and somehow he knew she was in trouble. Emma stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. But she knew she would be there, not because she trusted him, but because Sophie's future might depend on understanding exactly what she was up against. Outside, London hummed with its usual nighttime energy, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding in a small flat in Bethnal Green. But in the shadows of power and privilege, wheels were already turning, plans were being made, and a mother's worst nightmare was just beginning to take shape. The dance at the charity gala had lasted only minutes, but its consequences would echo for much longer. Emma held her daughter closer in her heart and prepared for the fight of her life. Hyde Park at 2 in the afternoon was bustling with life. Tourists snapped photos, joggers weaved between walking paths, and families spread blankets on the grass for impromptu picnics. But Emma felt disconnected from all of it as she approached Speaker's Corner, her heart hammering against her ribs. She spotted Alexander immediately. He was sitting on a bench near the corner, still wearing expensive clothes, but somehow looking less polished than he had at the gala. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. When he saw her approaching, he stood, and Emma noticed he was carrying a manila folder, and what looked like the broken pieces of her butterfly brooch in a small jewelry box. "Emma," he said softly when she was close enough. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," she admitted, staying a careful distance away. "But then I got served with papers yesterday." Funny how that happened so soon after our little reunion. Alexander's face darkened. "What kind of papers?" "Child Services. Someone's claiming I'm an unfit mother." Emma's voice was steady, but Alexander could see the fear in her eyes. Someone with enough influence to make social workers take anonymous accusations seriously. "My mother," Alexander said grimly. "It has to be." "Emma, I am so sorry. I never wanted you to be hurt by any of this. Then why did you hurt me 6 years ago?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it, raw and painful. "Why did you disappear without a word? Why did you let me believe you were someone else entirely?" Alexander gestured to the bench. Please, sit. This is going to take a while to explain. Emma remained standing, her arms crossed protectively across her chest. I'll stand, thank you. Alexander sighed and opened the manila folder. 6 years ago, my mother convinced me to participate in what she called a social experiment. She wanted me to understand how ordinary people lived before I took over more responsibilities in the family business. She arranged for me to attend graduate courses at Cambridge under a false name, live in a modest flat, survive on a limited budget. Emma's face was skeptical. And you just went along with this? I was 26 and still trying to please her, Alexander said honestly. I thought it would be interesting, maybe even noble in some way. I had no idea I was going to meet you. His voice softened as he continued. When I met you at that cafe, everything changed. You weren't impressed by wealth or status because you thought I didn't have any. You talked to me about books and dreams and what mattered in life. You made me laugh. You made me want to be a better person. Emma felt her resolve wavering slightly, but she forced herself to remember the pain of those months when he'd vanished. So, what happened? Why did you disappear? Alexander pulled out several photographs from the folder, because my mother made sure I would. Emma looked at the photos and gasped. They showed her coming out of various locations around London, but she wasn't alone. In each image, she appeared to be with different men, laughing, holding hands, looking intimate. These are fake, Emma said immediately. I know that now, but 6 years ago, when my mother showed them to me along with fabricated evidence that you were seeing multiple men while we were together, I believed them. Emma stared at him in disbelief. You actually thought I was cheating on you after everything we shared? I was young and stupid, and had been raised to believe that people outside our social circle couldn't be trusted, Alexander said miserably. My mother had spent my entire life preparing me to be suspicious of anyone who might want something from our family. So you just left, without even asking me about it? Alexander pulled out more documents from the folder. It was more than that. My mother also showed me this. Emma took the paper he handed her. It was a medical report, apparently from a private clinic, stating that she had been treated for a sexually transmitted infection and listing her as having multiple recent partners. This is completely fabricated, Emma said, her voice shaking with anger now. I have never been to this clinic. I had never been with anyone before you. And I wasn't with anyone else while we were together. I know I had it investigated after I saw you again at the gala. The clinic confirmed they have no record of ever treating you. Alexander looked ashamed, but at the time, combined with the photographs and a few other pieces of manufactured evidence, it was enough to convince me that everything we had together was a lie. Emma sank onto the bench, overwhelmed. So you believed I was some kind of scheming gold digger who was playing you for money you didn't even seem to have? More than that, Alexander said quietly. My mother convinced me that you had specifically targeted me after finding out my real identity. She said you were planning to trap me with a pregnancy and blackmail the family. But I was already pregnant, Emma whispered. I didn't even know I was pregnant when you disappeared. I didn't know that. By the time you would have discovered the pregnancy, I was already back in my old life, believing that you had betrayed me completely. Alexander sat beside her on the bench, careful to maintain some distance. Emma, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to understand that I was manipulated just as much as you were. Emma was quiet for a long time, staring at the fake photographs. When you disappeared, I tried everything to find you. The phone number was disconnected. The address you'd given me didn't exist. It was like you had never been real at all. Because James Morrison never was real, Alexander said. He was a character my mother helped me create, complete with false documents and a fabricated history. When she decided the experiment was over, James Morrison simply ceased to exist. Emma looked up at him, tears in her eyes. Do you know what it's like to carry a child and not be able to tell the father? To raise a daughter who asks about her daddy and have to lie because you don't even know if the man you loved was real? Alexander's own eyes were bright with unshed tears. I can't imagine, and I can't change what happened. But Emma, I want to know my daughter. I want to be part of her life if you'll let me. And what about your mother? What about the child services case? What about the fact that your family has enough power to destroy my life if they decide I'm a threat? Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like a small recording device. "That's why I need your help. My mother is dangerous, more dangerous than even I realized until this week. But she's also arrogant. She believes she's untouchable." Emma stared at the device. "What are you suggesting?" "She's going to try to take Sophie away from you, not because she cares about Sophie's welfare, but because she sees her as a Worthington heir that needs to be controlled and molded. She'll escalate things until she has no choice but to reveal her true motivations. You want to record her admitting to manipulation and fraud? It's the only way to stop her. She's been pulling strings behind the scenes of this family for decades. My father died when I was 15, and since then she's been the real power behind the Worthington name. She's destroyed people who got in her way, and she'll destroy you too if we don't stop her." Emma stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away. "This is insane. You're asking me to go up against one of the most powerful families in England based on the word of a man who abandoned me 6 years ago. I'm asking you to trust me, to protect you and Sophie the way I should have 6 years ago. And if your plan doesn't work, if she's smarter than you think she is, what happens to Sophie then?" Alexander stood as well, his voice becoming more urgent. "Emma, she's already coming after you. The child services case is just the beginning. She has investigators looking into your background, your finances, your personal life. She's going to build a case that you're an unfit mother, and she has the resources to make it stick." Emma felt the world spinning around her. "Why? Sophie doesn't even know about you. She's no threat to anyone. Because Sophie is a Worthington, whether my mother likes it or not, and Worthington children don't grow up in council flats with working-class mothers. In her mind, she's saving Sophie from a life of mediocrity. Or she's just a controlling woman who can't stand the idea of not having power over every aspect of your life," Emma said bitterly. "That too," Alexander admitted. "But the result is the same. She won't stop until she has custody of Sophie, and once she does, you'll be lucky if you get supervised visits." Emma sank back onto the bench, her head in her hands. "This is all my fault. If I had just kept walking that night, if I hadn't hidden behind that curtain, then I never would have found you again," Alexander said softly. "Emma, I've spent 6 years thinking about you, wondering what happened to you, regretting every choice I made. When I saw you at the gala, when I realized who you were, it was like I could finally breathe again." Emma looked up at him through her tears. "And what about Sophie? What happens if we do this and it works? What kind of life are you offering her?" Alexander knelt in front of the bench so he was eye level with her. "I'm offering her a father who will love her and protect her and never let anyone hurt her again. I'm offering her a chance to know where she comes from without having to choose between her heritage and her mother. I'm offering her a future where she can be whoever she wants to be. And what about us? What about you and me?" Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm hoping that maybe, someday, you might be able to forgive me enough to let me try to earn your love again." Emma was quiet for a long time, watching the people walk by in the park. Normal people with normal problems, people who didn't have to worry about family dynasties and social manipulation. Finally, she spoke. "What do you need me to do?" Alexander's relief was palpable. "Let me introduce myself to Sophie properly. Let me be her father openly. My mother will panic when she realizes I'm serious about claiming her as my daughter and you as someone important to me. That's when she'll make her real move. And you'll be ready to record it? I'll be ready to stop her once and for all." Emma picked up the small jewelry box containing the broken pieces of her butterfly brooch. "Can this be repaired?" "I've already had it looked at by a jeweler. He says it can be restored, but it will never be exactly the same as it was." Emma smiled sadly. "Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe none of us will be exactly the same as we were." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Alexander said. "Maybe we'll be stronger." Emma stood up, clutching the box with her broken brooch. "All right, Alexander Worthington. Let's go meet your daughter. But I'm warning you now, if you hurt her the way you hurt me, if you disappear from her life for any reason, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you regret it." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Alexander said. "And Emma, thank you for giving me this chance." As they walked through Hyde Park together, neither of them noticed the man in the dark coat who had been sitting on a nearby bench, close enough to overhear their entire conversation. He waited until they were out of sight, before pulling out his phone and dialing a familiar number. "Mrs. Worthington, it's Morrison. You were right to have them followed. They're planning something, and I think you should know exactly what it is." 3 weeks later, Emma's small flat felt different. It was still the same 2-bedroom apartment in Bethnal Green, still furnished with second-hand pieces and held together by determination. But now there were new sounds echoing through the rooms. Sophie's delighted laughter as she played chess with her father, the gentle rumble of Alexander's voice reading bedtime stories, and the careful conversations between two adults trying to rebuild something that had been shattered years ago. Alexander had been true to his word. He came by every day after Sophie finished school, sometimes bringing small gifts, always bringing his complete attention. He helped with homework, listened to stories about her day, and answered her endless questions with the patience of someone making up for lost time. "Daddy," Sophie said one evening as Alexander taught her to braid friendship bracelets, "why did you take so long to come find me?" Emma, who was preparing dinner in the tiny kitchen, felt her breath catch. They had agreed to tell Sophie a simplified version of the truth, that Daddy had been far away and hadn't known where to find her. But sometimes the innocent directness of a 6-year-old cut straight to the heart of things. Alexander was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the colorful threads. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes that hurt people they love. I made a mistake that kept me away from you and Mummy for too long. But you're here now," Sophie said matter-of-factly, the way children accept the world as it is. "Yes," Alexander said, glancing toward the kitchen where Emma was listening. "I'm here now, and I'm never going away again if I can help it." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Despite everything, despite the fear that still lived in her chest about what Victoria Worthington might do next, she was beginning to believe him. The domestic tranquility was shattered the next morning when Emma received a call from Mrs. Henderson, the social worker assigned to her case. "Miss Hartwell, I need to schedule a home visit for this Friday afternoon. We've received some additional concerns about Sophie's living situation that need to be addressed immediately." Emma's blood went cold. "What kind of concerns?" "I can't discuss the specifics over the phone, but I will need to speak with you and conduct a thorough evaluation of your home environment. Please have all relevant documentation ready, including proof of income, medical records for Sophie, and character references." After hanging up, Emma immediately called Alexander. "It's happening," she said when he answered. "They want to do a home evaluation on Friday." "Then we're ready," Alexander said, though Emma could hear the tension in his voice. "Remember, I'll be there as Sophie's father. My mother is going to hate that and she'll have to respond. What if she doesn't take the bait? What if she just lets the social services case proceed?" "She won't. Trust me, Emma. My mother can't resist being in control of everything personally. When she realizes I'm openly claiming Sophie and supporting you, she'll have to act directly." But Victoria Worthington was already 3 steps ahead of them. That Thursday evening, as Emma was giving Sophie a bath, there was a knock at the door. Emma opened it to find Detective Inspector Sarah Collins from the Metropolitan Police, accompanied by Mrs. Henderson and 2 other officials. "Emma Hartwell," Detective Collins asked, "I'm afraid we need to speak with you about some serious allegations." Emma's heart hammered as she let them in. "What's this about?" Mrs. Henderson looked genuinely distressed. "Miss Hartwell, we've received reports that you may be involved in blackmailing a prominent family. There are also concerns that you may be coaching Sophie to lie about her paternity for financial gain." "That's ridiculous," Emma said, but she could hear how weak her voice sounded. Detective Collins pulled out a tablet and showed Emma a series of photographs. They showed her meeting with Alexander in Hyde Park, sitting close together on the bench, looking at documents. "These photos suggest you've been meeting secretly with Alexander Worthington to discuss some kind of arrangement," Detective Collins said. "We also have a recording of a phone conversation where you allegedly discuss making the Worthington family pay for what they did to you." Emma stared at the photos in horror. "You've been watching me." "Miss Hartwell," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "if you're in some kind of financial difficulty, there are legitimate ways to seek help. Trying to extort money from wealthy families by making false paternity claims is a serious crime." "I'm not trying to extort anyone," Emma said desperately. "Alexander is Sophie's father. He came to me, not the other way around." "Mummy?" came a small voice from the hallway. Sophie appeared in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit and looking frightened by the presence of strangers in their flat. Mrs. Henderson knelt down to Sophie's level. "Hello, Sophie. My name is Mrs. Henderson. I'd like to ask you a few questions if that's all right. Emma wanted to protest, but she knew refusing would only make things worse. Sophie, has your mummy been teaching you what to say about your daddy? Mrs. Henderson asked gently. Sophie looked confused. What do you mean? Has she told you to say that a specific man is your father? Maybe promised you something special if you said the right things? Sophie shook her head vigorously. Mummy never lies to me, and Daddy found us because of the butterfly brooch. Mummy didn't know he was going to come back. Mrs. Henderson and Detective Collins exchanged glances. What butterfly brooch, sweetheart? Sophie looked toward her mother, who nodded encouragingly, despite her fear. It was my great-grandmother's brooch. Mummy wears it sometimes. When it broke at the fancy party, Daddy picked it up and remembered her. Sophie, Detective Collins said carefully, when did you first meet this man you call Daddy? 3 weeks ago, Sophie said honestly. But I knew about him before that. Mummy has pictures of them together from when she was younger. Emma's heart sank. She did have old photos of herself and Alexander from 6 years ago, hidden in a box in her bedroom. But mentioning them now would only make her look more like someone who had been planning this for years. After the officials left with promises to continue the investigation, Emma sat on her sofa with Sophie, trying not to fall apart completely. Mummy, are we in trouble? Sophie asked quietly. I don't know, sweetheart, Emma admitted. But whatever happens, I want you to remember that I love you more than anything in the world, and everything I've done has been to protect you. The next morning, Alexander arrived to find Emma packing a small suitcase. What's going on? He asked. They're going to take her, Emma said, her voice hollow. Your mother has thought of everything. They have photos of us meeting, recordings of conversations that have been taken out of context, and they're spinning it like I'm some kind of criminal mastermind who's been planning to blackmail your family for years. Alexander took the suitcase from her hands. Where are you going? I don't know. Somewhere your mother can't find us. Somewhere Sophie will be safe. Emma, if you run, it will only confirm everything they're saying about you. And if I stay, they'll take Sophie away from me and give her to your mother. At least this way we have a chance. Alexander was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone. There's another way. Alexander, your plan isn't going to work. Your mother is too smart, too powerful. She's not going to confess anything on a recording. She doesn't have to confess, Alexander said, dialing a number, because I already have everything I need. The call was answered on the second ring. Thomas, it's Alexander. I need you to contact Detective Inspector Collins immediately. Tell her that Victoria Worthington has been using private investigators to illegally surveil British citizens, and that I have evidence of fraud, manipulation of official documents, and conspiracy to commit perjury. Emma stared at him. What evidence? Alexander smiled grimly. Remember my mother's assistant, Margaret. She worked for the family for 30 years before my mother fired her last month for asking too many questions about family finances. Margaret kept very detailed records, and she's been waiting for the right moment to use them. Over the next few hours, Emma's flat became the center of a different kind of investigation. Margaret Preston, a dignified woman in her 60s, arrived with boxes of documents, recordings, and photographs that painted a very different picture of Victoria Worthington's activities. She's been doing this for decades, Margaret explained to Detective Collins, destroying anyone who threatened the family's reputation or Alexander's future, according to her plans. The young woman 6 years ago wasn't the first, and Miss Hartwell wouldn't be the last. The evidence was overwhelming. Records of payments to private investigators, contracts with people to create false documents and testimonies, correspondence detailing exactly how to manipulate social services investigations. Victoria had been so confident in her power that she had documented everything. Detective Collins looked at Emma with genuine apology. Miss Hartwell, it appears you've been the victim of a very sophisticated campaign of harassment and defamation. We'll be dropping all investigations into your conduct and opening a formal inquiry into Victoria Worthington's activities. But Victoria wasn't finished yet. That evening, as Emma and Alexander were finally beginning to believe they had won, Emma's phone rang. The caller ID showed Sophie's school. Miss Hartwell, came the panicked voice of Mrs. Chen, Sophie's teacher. Sophie's grandmother came to collect her from school. She had legal documents showing temporary custody. Sophie was very upset, but the papers looked official and she said you had approved it. Emma dropped the phone, but Alexander caught it. Mrs. Chen, "This is Alexander Worthington, Sophie's father. The woman who took Sophie is not her grandmother legally, and she had no right to remove her from school. We are calling the police immediately." The next few hours passed in a blur of police stations, legal documents, and frantic phone calls. Victoria had used her connections to obtain emergency custody papers based on the now discredited allegations against Emma, and she had moved quickly while the investigation was still unfolding. Finally, Detective Collins located Sophie at the Worthington mansion in Mayfair. The little girl was safe but frightened, and Victoria was arrested for child abduction and fraud. As they drove to collect Sophie, Emma looked at Alexander. "Is it really over?" "The legal part, yes. My mother will face charges and she'll never be able to threaten you or Sophie again." "But Emma," he paused, reaching for her hand. "What about us? Where do we go from here?" Emma squeezed his hand. "I don't know. 6 years ago, I thought I knew who you were, and I was wrong. 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew who you were, and I was wrong again. I need time to figure out who you really are now. And I need time to prove to you that I'm someone worthy of your trust," Alexander said. "But I want to spend that time with you and Sophie if you'll let me." When they arrived at the mansion, Sophie ran into Emma's arms, followed more slowly by Victoria Worthington. The older woman looked every bit as elegant as always, but there was something broken in her eyes. "I was trying to give her opportunities," Victoria said quietly to Emma. "I was trying to give her the life she deserves." "She deserves to be with her mother," Emma replied, but her voice wasn't angry. It was sad. "She deserves to be loved for who she is, not shaped into who someone else thinks she should be." Victoria nodded slowly. Perhaps you're right." 6 months later, Emma opened her own dance studio in a converted warehouse in Shoreditch. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, funded by Alexander but owned entirely by Emma. She taught children from all backgrounds, believing that everyone deserved the chance to discover the music in their bodies. Alexander visited every day, sometimes to help with Sophie, sometimes just to talk with Emma as they slowly rebuilt their relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of pretense. Victoria, after serving a suspended sentence and completing community service, was allowed supervised visits with Sophie. The relationship was stiff and formal at first, but Sophie's natural warmth eventually melted even Victoria's icy reserve. On the day of Sophie's first recital at the new studio, Emma stood backstage helping her daughter with the butterfly brooch, now carefully repaired and gleaming on Sophie's costume. "Mummy," Sophie said, "are you nervous?" Emma smiled. "A little, but good nervous, excited nervous." "Me too," Sophie said. Then, with the wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of children, she added, "Sometimes broken things become more beautiful when they're fixed, don't they?" Emma touched the butterfly brooch gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes they do." The recital was a triumph, not because the dancing was perfect, but because it was filled with joy. In the audience, Alexander applauded enthusiastically, while Victoria sat quietly beside him, tears streaming down her face as she watched her granddaughter soar across the stage. After the performance, as families gathered in the small reception area, Sophie grabbed both her parents' hands and pulled them toward the makeshift stage. "Can you dance like you did at the fancy hotel?" she asked. "I want to see you dance together." Emma and Alexander looked at each other, then at their daughter's hopeful face. "We don't have music," Emma said. Sophie giggled. "Mrs. Chen can play the piano." And so, in a converted warehouse in Shoreditch, surrounded by families from every walk of life, Emma and Alexander danced together again. It wasn't the perfect waltz they had shared in the gilded ballroom of the Kensington Royal Hotel. Alexander stepped on Emma's feet twice, and Emma forgot the rhythm during a turn. But it was real. It was theirs. And it was beautiful. In the audience, Victoria watched her son and the woman he loved dance with their daughter, and for the first time in years, she understood what truly mattered. Not reputation or social standing or controlling the future, but this moment, this imperfect, genuine happiness. As the last notes of the music faded, Sophie clapped her hands in delight. "Now you're a real family," she announced to everyone present. Emma looked at Alexander, then at Victoria sitting in the back row, then at all the faces around them, and realized that Sophie was right. Not because of blood or marriage or social expectations, but because of choice. They had all chosen to be here in this moment, rebuilding something broken into something stronger. The butterfly had finally learned to fly.